Okay, so we are now recording. I want to give people another minute or two to find their way in, but while we do that, let me just unmute you all because you can now see what I'm expecting to talk about over the course of the next hour. If there are things that you would like to see me discuss that you don't see up here, please feel free to raise your hand or ask me a question, and I will see if I can work in your concerns either right now or at some point during the presentation. It's exciting to see everybody joining in, and it's sort of vindicating my decision to wait another minute or two before we get started. For those of you that haven't had a chance yet to meet our new program director here at Pro Bono Net, Audrey Ruffet, is on the call. I don't know if you want to take a chance to introduce, take an opportunity to introduce yourself, Audrey.
Hi, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself. Hi, everyone. I think I've met many of the folks on this call, either in person or I've been on various calls with you, but my name is Audrey Ruffet. I am the Director of Program Delivery at Pro Bono Net. I joined about 8 months ago and have been working with Sam since then. So I'm glad to be here on the call.
Excellent. So I think we have pretty good attendance now. I'm hoping, I know that I'm recording. I do not think I have successfully made it so that everyone is able to speak whenever they like. Let me, you know what, Cascade, I'm going to make you a panelist as well, and hopefully you may be able to help me. I want to make sure that people can ask questions whenever they want. That's generally my goal, but especially for a session like this, where I anticipate talking about some things that people are going to definitely have reactions to, and that I want to make sure we all have a chance to speak freely. So if you feel like you're not being heard, raise your hand, or ask a question. Try to get the attention of one of us in one way or another, and I will do my best to notice you and be responsive. Okay, I think I will jump in. This is the agenda for this call. I want to start with some brief general updates. I'll begin by talking a little bit about performance issues. A number of you have commented recently about sluggish performance on your sites on the LawHelp platform. You are right. This is an issue. It's an issue that many of you will be aware we've been working on for a while now. It sort of has been cropping up periodically, and what we've been doing for some time has been a variety of short-term fixes that have included things like adding extra capacity to the site and reordering which states are paired together on which servers on our back end, etc. Right now, this issue has the undivided attention of the tech team, and they have an opportunity to do what we hope will be a more comprehensive long-term solution. If you remember when we talked right after the TIG conference, I mentioned that after we cleared away some program work that was left over from 2016, we would be turning to focus on some comprehensive upgrades, to sort of deep areas of the LawHelp system where we've been deferring maintenance over the last year because we had so many new features that we were delivering. This is the work that we're doing now, And the major payoff that we anticipate from this is going to be a substantial increase in the performance and the responsiveness of the site. There's going to be a minor code push within the next couple of weeks. I don't have a firm date for it yet, but within the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're hoping to do a minor code push related to this that will ideally have some effect on performance and also on site security. We're anticipating that this minor code push will let us move to HTTPS, which is rapidly becoming the standard for all websites, whereas it used to be only for things like e-banking or e-commerce. We attempted to move to HTTPS, you may recall, last summer and again in the fall, and the reason why we haven't been able to do that is because some of these issues that we're resolving with this deferred maintenance were preventing it. So there were different pieces of the underlying technology that were not up to date enough to accept the new HTTPS connections, and so we're resolving that now. That's work that I hope will be completed in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and then it will take us another 2 months or so to 2 or 3 months to get into the really sort of comprehensive upgrade job that we're doing on a variety of different pieces of our technology framework that you haven't heard of and don't really need to hear of. We're sort of elbow deep in the guts of the site. And it's going to take a while to do that work, but we anticipate that it will lead to a much more satisfying long-term resolution to some of the performance problems that have been cropping up on a recurring basis for a while now. The act of upgrading all these different pieces of the site should itself deliver an immediate performance boost, but additionally, these upgrades will give us new tools that will increase our ability to respond to performance issues in a more dynamic, flexible way. So right now, with the tools that we have, you know, there are a handful of different things we can try to solve problems, and you've seen us try them over the last year or so. We anticipate that with these new tools, not only will the thing run better out of the gate, but we will have a variety of additional options when it comes to solving problems going forward in the future. So there are issues with performance on the platform right now. We are working on them at the moment. I hope to show you something related to this within the next couple of weeks, and then within the next couple of months, we hope to, you know, it's going to be a comprehensive attack at the root of this problem, rather than pruning the weed. We're going to tear it out, and I'm pretty excited about that. So that's that. I also wanted to give you guys a quick update on LawHelp-related letters of interest that went into LSC this term. Thanks to everybody who ended up submitting a letter of interest with us, and also everyone who took the time to talk with us about you know, the needs of their program, and whether whether it made sense to partner with Pro Bono Net this season to try to move things forward. Hopefully everyone had a chance to look over the memo that I sent around in response to the Ernst & Young evaluation that LSC released this winter. In that memo, I identified a number of different priorities that I saw as necessary for the LawHelp platform in order to respond to the findings that came out of the evaluation. And we managed to submit 3 TIG LOIs that speak to the various priorities that I tried to identify in that memo. So we're pretty pleased with that. In order of ambition, from the things that that I think will be sort of the easiest to manage and deliver on and grasp, to things that are going to be more of a challenge, but also very exciting. We submitted a TIG in partnership with the Montana Legal Services Association to work on improvements to the insight search feature on LawHelp, and also on a new templating feature. So improvements to insight search, what I'm really hoping to be able to do there is to make the insight search more flexible and intuitive. Ideally, it would be able to take natural language phrases and questions and deliver search results. So instead of having to search for the keyword divorce, someone could say, how do I get away from my husband? And it would propose resources about divorce, and probably, in response to that question, ideally also some resources about domestic violence. So that's one piece of the LOI that we submitted with Montana. The other one is the idea of creating a templating feature for the LawHelp backend. So you can imagine creating a resource or an organization, and then instead of just saving it as a resource, you could save it as a template so that it can be used. Again, if you ever want to create another similar resource, you would not need to start from scratch. You could begin from a predefined template. And I think that this has a lot of potential, particularly in situations where people are reproducing content. The example that I love to use is on LawHelp Minnesota. They've done a tremendous job using the Guide Me feature that came out in 2015 to set up their automated forms. So they have all of these step-by-step instructions that lead up to the eventual form. And this is really great, but there's a certain amount of labor involved in this. I imagine that step 2 looks to be specific to this name change application form, but step 1, what the program is going to do, or step 3, what kind of information you might need, what your computer needs to do. These steps might be the same for any form that LawHelp Minnesota wants to produce in this fashion, and the fact that they're all laid out in this step-by-step way is probably pretty consistent from form to form. And so ideally we want to create a feature that would let them save a version of this resource as a template, and this could be entirely completed, and this could be entirely completed, and then here it could say insert instructions here, and here it could say insert LawHelp widget here, but then the process of creating one of these would just have far fewer steps. And additionally, a person who wanted to create one of these, it would be easier to hand that task off to someone who hadn't necessarily done it before, and you could be confident that the result would come out in the same way as all of the other forms on this site, in a much more uniform way, because you would be building off of a template. So that's the concept there. It's similar to the templating concept that you'll see in Microsoft Word or in Google Drive, that kind of thing. So that's what we're hoping to do here. Search was an idea that was directly called out in the evaluation as an area that needs to improve, and then this templating feature, in addition to the third LOI, are an attempt to find technological solutions to the labor problem that is implicit in a lot of what Ernst & Young were saying. They're proposing all of these things, like a greater focus on plain language drafting, more uniformity, keeping things more up to date, and implicit in those recommendations is a lot of work that needs to go into our sites. And so what we're trying to do at PBN is figure out what kind of technology changes can we make to reduce the amount of labor involved as far as we can, and make that labor more efficient. And that's sort of where the second half of the proposal that we put in with the Montana Legal Services Association is going. Another proposal that we put in with the Atlanta Legal Aid Society in Georgia is to do an accessibility and graphics review of the site. So accessibility was an area that was touched on in a big way by the Ernst & Young evaluation. Some of the most significant issues that they raised regarding the LawHelp platform, we fixed within hours of hearing about them in detail from Ernst & Young. And we have also made some substantial changes to the way that we do quality assurance in order to make sure that new features are going through a robust accessibility review on top of the other kinds of review that we've been doing. But that leaves a variety of work to be done on material that we've already released to go over it, see how it functions specifically in regards to screen readers, and update it so that it's performing to a very high standard. That's the big part of what the Atlanta Legal Aid Society wants to be doing with us. And then the graphics review is just to acknowledge that the approach to graphics on the LawHelp platform over the last several years, as it's been in operation, has grown as a result of different contributions made by partners in different states who have done their own graphic work on buttons and icons and things to augment their own sites. And we want to take a little bit of time to sort of consolidate all of these graphic contributions that people have made and create a more unified package for them so that it's easier for people to take advantage across the entire network of work that's taken place in one state or another. And the last one I'm particularly excited about. It's something that I've wanted to achieve for a while now. Hopefully this will be an opportunity to do it. With the Southwest Virginia Legal Aid Society, we put in a letter of intent to work on new authorship features that we hope will help support greater volunteer collaboration on authoring and updating material on LawHelp sites. So as I mentioned, there's implicit in the EY evaluation a real labor challenge. How are we going to get the resources to do all of this work that they're proposing? And one potential path forward is to make it easier for volunteers to contribute to the site. In order to do that technologically, we have to provide features that will make it simpler and safer for you to open up your sites to a larger number of people over whom you exercise more indirect control. So right now, the only way to be a contributor on a LawHelp site is to have unfettered access to the entire site, to be able to delete things and publish things and all kinds of stuff. And that's a lot of trust to put in someone. But if you can imagine a scenario where you could create users on your own and give them more restrictive levels of permission. So some people, for example, would have permission to publish material to the site, but not to look at your reporting statistics or delete material or create new users. And other people would have permission to create new records or edit existing records, but not to publish material. So they would be able to make changes, but they would not be able to push those changes out to visitors without the review and the approval of somebody who did have that level of permission. And ideally, you would be able to even restrict people to only certain sections. So you could say this person has, publication privileges for the housing topic, for example. And so technologically, that's what we need to build. And then in order to prove the utility of that idea, we're hoping the plan is to partner with a law school in Virginia that would stand up some kind of a curriculum around plain language drafting. And so they would help us, design trainings essentially that would explain the task and get people prepared to engage in the kind of writing that we need on our LawHelp sites, and then also recruit a pool of initial volunteers to, use the technology and use the training and prove their worth by seeing whether all of these ideas can come together to actually let a bunch of volunteer authors create new material or update existing material on the valegalaid.org site in a useful way. So this is a tricky one. It has a lot of moving parts. but I think it has some of the most potential, because if we're able to create an environment where you all are operating more as editors and evaluating the worth of submissions that are coming in rather than trying to chase material down or convince people to write it for you. And if we're able to offer these authorship opportunities on our statewide websites as a form of pro bono volunteering that's pretty self-contained and easy to engage in, I think both of those two things are potentially transformative for the way that we do our work. So I'm very excited about that one. Okay, so those are and then the last thing that I wanted to talk about, right, is an example of custom work. I just wanted to take a moment to share with you, people have been working on ways to respond to emerging crises, and one thing is a newfound focus on immigrants and resources for immigrants, and there were two approaches that happened on the LawHelp platform over the course of the winter. They both involve the mini portal tool. This is a mini portal that I put together with the Northwest Justice Project in Washington State. We had this up and running. I think the shell of it took just about an afternoon. I'm not sure how much additional time Danielle put in after that, but the goal here was really to stand up a landing page with critical resources as quickly as possible. And Danielle and I, working together, were able to get this up and running pretty rapidly. Let me see if I can. Danielle, I don't know if you want to say any more about this. What I just want to emphasize that the goal here was really sort of speed.
Yeah, we were able to get this up pretty quickly. Just tagging, related resources and collecting links, and then push this out to all of our partners around Washington. So it became kind of the go-to page, and it was super easy to set up, thanks to Sam.
Yep, and it was a pleasure working with you on it. And this is the kind of thing, we want to do our part as well, and I want to do my part as well, and we're very, very happy to work with people as exigent circumstances emerge. And then another example of a different approach, the LawHelp New York team spent a little bit longer thinking about design. This took maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks to put together. So it wasn't up in the course of an afternoon, but sort of spent a longer time working on presentation. And this is also a mini portal, so it doesn't use the default mini portal theme. There's some additional custom design work that's happening in here. I worked with them on the custom design, but all of it is something that is executable. This is not something that had to go to our development team. This did not involve changing the framework of the site or anything that deep or that sophisticated. These are some pretty superficial changes to tools that are already available in the mini portal, and they're changes that are completely achievable by anyone with the level of access that all of you have to your sites. And like I said, to me, the trade-off is that this took significantly longer to roll out, but ended up with a pretty snappy design, and one that would be, for the most part, pretty portable to other sites. If I were going to hand this off to someone outside, if you aren't necessarily comfortable looking at HTML code, I might change these buttons very, very slightly. I probably would have, instead of a caption, I'd have this overlay cover the entire image for reasons that I won't go into, but basically it would make it easier to make changes without going into the HTML layer. But this is an example of what you can do if you put in a little bit more time. And a lot of that was just spent in meetings and back and forth and finding images to represent each of these, because once you decide that you're going to use images, you have to find an image for each one, and that can be time consuming. But these are sort of two examples. The last thing that I'll touch on really quickly here if you look at this page, I just want you to watch this area down here, and you'll see there's this context box that explains what the LawHelp button is, that fades in and then it fades out. This is something that I've been working on with LawHelp New York as well. In general, the mobile responsive design is performing quite well. LawHelp New York noticed after they moved onto it that the number of chat requests coming from mobile devices had fallen off steeply since they adopted the mobile responsive design. And so we went through an A/B testing phase where we tried a variety of different approaches to try to increase attention to the button down here. And the one that ended up working the best, we discovered, was to add this this context box. And it appears when you hover over it on desktop, but it also just sort of very gracefully appears and then disappears on each page when you're viewing mobile. And so this is something, you know, in our A/B testing, we found that this increased engagement by mobile visitors with this button by 180%. And so after we rolled this out across the site, the New York team has seen the mobile numbers come back up to roughly where they were before we moved from the old mobile platform onto the new responsive design. So you know, this is a relatively you know, new development as far as getting the results from our A/B test and implementing it across the entire platform and seeing that it has the result that we thought it would based on what we saw in our test environments. If this is something that you're interested in implementing on your own LawHelp button, it's pretty simple to do. You just have to write to me, and what I would need from you is just the message that you would like for both the online state and the offline state of the button. And I should be able to roll that out on your LawHelp button as well if you're interested. Okay, so those are all the various updates that I wanted to give that are more general, and now I want to launch into a more serious discussion of the prototype performance analysis reports. And so I'm pretty excited about this. This is a preview of a talk that I'm planning to give at the EJC conference in Pittsburgh in May. And so I expect that funders will be there, all sorts of people will be there. I'm going to be saying some things that may be controversial, may rub people the wrong way, may rub some people on this call the wrong way. I'm sensitive to that. I think this is a conversation that we need to have, but I completely acknowledge that I may not have the entire picture. I'm trying to start a conversation, not provide anything definitive. And I want to engage with you on the subject. So if you have critiques about either the information that I'm presenting or the way that I'm presenting it, if you think that there's a better way to sort of talk about this, that will make this conversation a more constructive conversation to have. I very, very much would love to hear your feedback about this. That said, I'm going to launch right in. So the presentation I'm giving at EJC is called Benchmarking Statewide Legal Information Websites, Key Indicators for Interpreting Website Impact and Performance. And here's what I want to do with you over the course of the next 20 minutes or so. Just to start with a brief note about numbers, and then talk a little bit about the promise of reporting, why it's something that we do and that we're trying to do, what the problems are with reporting as I see them currently, specifically the problems with the kinds of reporting that our funders tend to ask us for, and how the work that I'm about to talk to you concerning, I think, represents some potential solutions to those problems. So to begin with, I just want to acknowledge that we need to exercise a degree of caution when we do this kind of work. We tend to focus a lot on data these days, particularly quantitative data. And I know that this focus can rub some people the wrong way, and I think that it's justifiable for it to rub them the wrong way. Much of the value of what we do, or what we hope to do as legal services practitioners, is hard to quantify. And experts don't disagree. I have not read this book, but I love the introduction because I think that this statement, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted, is such a pithy, aphoristic version of the kinds of concerns that I think a lot of us share when we dive into quantitative analyses of our work. And so I want to acknowledge that and center it, and say that, you know, as I talk about this stuff, this is something that I understand and that I very much keep in mind. It's also been said more recently by people that look specifically at issues related to online user experience and user design, right? Quantitative studies boil a complex situation down to a single number that's easy to grasp and discuss, but it's a dangerous mistake to believe that statistical research is somehow more scientific or credible than insight-based observational research. User interfaces and usability are highly contextual, and their effectiveness depends on a broad understanding of human behavior. So why do we even do quantitative studies then in this situation? Well, one reason is that our funders expect it of us. Our funders are asking us for numbers, and they're evaluating us on the basis of the numbers that we provide them. And so it behooves us to think carefully about the numbers that we have and what they mean and what we can do with them, because otherwise we may be setting ourselves up for problems with our funders, and I think that in some ways we are at the moment. I'm going to get into that in a minute. And the other reason is that, you know, as Nielsen acknowledges, quantitative studies boil a complex situation down to a single number that's easy to grasp and discuss. And there's a danger in that, but there's also a real benefit. We don't always have the time or the resources to do the kinds of complex qualitative studies that might be the best way to inform our work. And when we're strapped for time and we still want to make a somewhat careful decision about where to spend our limited resources, quantitative studies can be powerful, and they can be better than nothing if we use them in the correct way. So these are the challenges inherent in the kind of task that I want to take on in the next few minutes. And I think that the best way to acknowledge these challenges and to overcome them is to always be really clear about a few cardinal rules. You need to understand what the number you are using represents. You need to understand where that number is coming from. You need to be certain that you are always placing that number in context. And you'll see what I mean about that in a moment. And you need to ask whether the number that you're looking at intuitively makes sense. You know, with your deep knowledge of your individual programs, does this number tell a story that makes sense to you? Can you imagine a hypothesis about where this number might be coming from, or is it just confusing and mystifying? If it's confusing and mystifying, one possibility is that it's the wrong number, or it's in the wrong context, or there's some important data that's missing. And that's entirely possible. So when we look at all of this stuff, you know, I want to be very clear that we aren't saying that, you know, high things are definitely good and low things are definitely bad. We always have to be careful about interrogating these. You know, that said, what we're really interested in here is strapped for time, needing to make careful decisions. Ideally, we want to find a few needles that we can watch with confidence, so that we aren't, you know, completely certain that high is good and low is bad or whatever. But you know, if it's high, we're probably okay. And if it's low, we should probably take some time to investigate the issue. And it may turn out that the issue is a non-issue and that we're actually okay. But if it's low, it means that it's worth it to stop for a moment and dig a little deeper. And if it's high, it means we can probably get on with our day and worry about other things that are crossing our desk, rather than, you know, whether we need to dig deeply into that part of our program at the moment. We can watch a few straightforward figures and use them to take control of all the different tasks that we're trying to achieve. So the promise of this, in essence, is, as I see it, there are two key questions that I want for myself and for everybody on this call, everyone in our position, to be able to ask at any given moment, both to make a strong case to our funders and to make wise decisions about how to spend our own program resources. The first is our site making a difference? What is the impact of our program on the people that we're trying to serve. And the second is, when we do work on our program or on our site, do our efforts pay off? Does our site's performance reflect the investments that we are making in it? These are two really important questions, and ideally we'll have a situation where we're working like this, and where there are these needles that we can watch and we feel very in control of the situation. But while we use numbers because we imagine that they will give us an experience like this, often we find ourselves in situations like this. We look at the information coming out of Google Analytics and it's just overwhelming, and it's very hard to know what to do with, and there are all kinds of different indicators, and some of them look good and some of them look bad, and we're not really in control. We don't feel in control, or I don't feel in control sometimes at least, of what's going on with all these numbers. They've escaped their meaning, and they're pushing us around rather than guiding us and letting us make strategic choices. So how do we avoid this problem? First, I want to take a step back from our focus on delivering the numbers that our funders ask for, and instead ask ourselves whether these numbers that they're asking for actually show them what they're hoping to see. As an example, let's look at the LSC Grant Activity Reporting Guidelines. LSC asks for two numbers from our statewide website programs: the total number of unique visitors to websites, regardless of the purpose of the visits, and the total number of downloads of legal education materials on websites. So let's imagine a scenario in which these are the figures for these two numbers that LSC has asked for a particular program. What do they actually represent, right? We have 10 total users for a given website, and we have 10 downloads of legal education materials. So with these two figures, can anyone on the call tell me how many people this site helped? And Reese, I see that you asked a question where the first example. I'm not sure what that means, but if you want to rephrase. Here, all right, I'm gonna pause. Okay. Sorry guys, I'm struggling with the interface a little bit for a minute. I just want to find Jillian now that I didn't realize that she joined us, and make her an organizer, and now she can help me out with this. Okay, so the answer is that it's a trick question, because you cannot tell how many people the site has helped based on these two numbers, and I'll prove it to you. It would be a mistake to imagine that 10 visitors and 10 downloads means that you've helped 10 people, because that assumes that each person downloaded one legal education material, where there's no guarantee that that actually happened based on these two numbers. It's just as possible that a single person downloaded 10 legal education materials, 9 people showed up to the home page of the website, got overwhelmed or confused, and left. So you've helped anywhere from 1 to 10 people in this scenario, and you can't say how many. So all you can do with these two numbers is say that at least one person downloaded legal education materials, which is a pretty weak claim that you can make. So these two numbers don't really help the LSC understand the impact that our sites are having in terms of the number of people that they're helping. I want to note in passing that counting only downloads also causes a lot of problems in terms of the information that they're asking for. I'll just say here that this model assumes that people only use information if they're going to download it for later, which is unlikely to be true these days if it ever was true. For example, over half the visits to LawHelp last month were from visitors who never used a desktop to visit the site. And in 80% of those visits, the person interacted with the legal resource in some way. So if these people are never using a desktop, is it really fair to assume that their ideal is to download a PDF for later? Viewing PDF material in their mobile browser is a lot less friendly than viewing it as HTML as far as user experience goes. So should we really be evaluating visitors' interactions more comprehensively in terms of whether they, or having this narrow focus on downloads? But I don't want to get too much into that right now. That's a topic for another time. But I do think that leads us naturally into potential solutions. If we're going to watch numbers and used appropriately, I think watching them can be a very useful thing to do. There are some better numbers that we could be watching. To make my argument about why looking at visitor downloads is a mistake, I didn't simply tell you the number of visitors who interacted with LawHelp that don't appear to have access to a desktop. In fact, I didn't tell you that number at all. I gave you something that's almost always better. I provided context by talking in terms of a ratio. So here's what I mean. Imagine that I'd done the opposite and had started with a number. In case you're curious, this is the number we were working from. These are all of the visitors to LawHelp sites in February 2017 who never used a desktop. On its own, though, this number doesn't really tell us anything. Is it big? Is it small? How significant is this portion of the LawHelp audience? We can't know without context. So here's the context. You can balance that number out by putting it in proportion against the total number of visitors that LawHelp saw during that period. As I said, over half of our visitors fall into this category. And you can further contextualize it by saying that not only are a significant number of our visitors only using their phones, but these people don't merely visit the LawHelp site on their phones. They use LawHelp resources during their visits. So here I moved the initial number into the denominator of a ratio and looked at how many people from that pool of mobile-only users are interacting with LawHelp resources by viewing them, downloading them, or clicking on them to obtain material hosted on one of our partner sites. More than the actual values, it's these proportions that I'm using to drive my argument that the LSC should be looking beyond downloads when measuring site impact. And that's the key insight that I'm trying to get at here. This relationship between the number of people who walk in our doors and the number of people who walk away with something is one of the key needles that I think we need to watch. It gives us a measurement of how engaging users are finding our sites. Now we'll see this ratio again in a moment when we're trying to measure site performance, but I want to back up a little bit and talk about site impact. So site performance is our second question. In order to understand site performance properly, we have a little bit more ground to cover. So let's use the same method and pick another number. This one isn't real. Assume that a particular LawHelp site had 100,000 visitors and use its legal resources in 2016. Is that number large or small? What is the site's impact? Again, the answer is that we can't really say without context. For example, if we learn that the state that's running this site is California, we're going to have a very different opinion of whether 100,000 visitors is a big number or a small number than if the state is Rhode Island. And the idea has less to do with the size of the respective states, which is what I'm sort of emphasizing with this graphic, and more to do with the fact that their populations are so different. So 100,000 people is 0.2% of California's population, whereas it's 9.4% of Rhode Island's population. So the size of the audience that your site achieves is best understood in relationship to the size of the audience you would ideally want it to reach. Now, we don't know precisely how many people might need legal information of the kind offered on a given state's website, but it's reasonable to assume that whatever that number is, it's related in some way to the number of people living in that state. So we're using the population of each state as an approximation of the ideal audience, the number of people who actually need legal information about California or Rhode Island in a given moment. I'll actually note that I'm starting to do some more analysis that suggests that really the best number is the number of people in each state living below the federal poverty line. That seems to be an even better indicator of the ideal audience size, but I'm going to leave that aside for now. So what we're saying is that the impact of the site is best understood as the number of visitors served, expressed as in proportion to the population of the state. At the moment, we're measuring visitors served by looking at the number of visitors who viewed, downloaded, or clicked on a resource. We might find even better ways to measure that concept in the future, but right now that's how we're doing it. And so in addition to giving us some internal sense of its relative size, putting site impact in context this way lets us do something critically important. We can define it right. So the number we care about is the number of visitors our site serves in a given time period. And to put that figure in context, we can express it as a proportion of the total population of the state the site is intended to serve.
Sam, really
Sure.
quickly, we do have a comment from Reese, who mentioned that in DC, only about 20% of their traffic actually comes from DC.
Yes. And when you read the full report, Reese, you'll notice when I first started running these visualizations, DC was a huge outlier. DC's figures were way off in the stratosphere when expressed as a proportion of population. What I discovered is that the population of DC is around 600,000. The DMV metro area is about 6 million. And when I plugged in the figure for the DMV metro area instead of the DC population proper, your figures came down into the world of the rest of the LawHelp network and began to make a lot more sense. And so when you read your analysis, you will note that there's actually an asterisk that tells everybody. It doesn't tell everybody who DC is, but it says that for DC, we're not using the population of the district, we're using the population of the metro area. For exactly that reason. It's interesting that you imagine that it's a lot of federal stuff as well, which may attract a wider audience. These are the kinds of things that I haven't factored in yet, but one of the things that told me that I was on the right track is that it makes sense that people who live in Virginia but work in DC might also be using LawHelp DC, and when you plug in the number for the entire metro area, then DC's figures become sensible in the world of other figures that we're seeing. So thank you for that comment. In addition,
we have one other comment from Molly, who just mentioned that a lot of their resources don't require a download.
Yep, and this visualization, we're not counting only downloads here either. Right, that's one of the key problems with downloads is actually the sites that more conform to best practices, including the LSC's own best practices as expressed in the recent EY evaluation, will have fewer downloads because the LSC evaluation says don't use PDFs. And yet they are evaluating us based on how many downloads people make, which is kind of like asking doctors to explain their productivity to you in terms of how many patients they bled last month. It's utterly nonsensical. But here we are describing visitors served in terms of people who either download or view or click a link through to some third-party site for resources. Organizations aren't part of this visualization yet for reasons that I don't want to get into because of time constraints, but it has to do with the difficulty of evaluating them at the moment. But the other thing that you get by putting things in the context of population is the ability to compare states in a meaningful way to one another. So in the upper left, you see the raw number of visitors served by each LawHelp site plotted on a line. And it's difficult to make much sense of this information. Most of the site's numbers are relatively small. There are a few ones that stick out, and the ones that stick out tend to be the numbers from the more populous states. In the lower right, you can see the number of visitors served by each LawHelp site expressed as a percentage of the total population for that state. And now the figures are starting to make a little more sense. The points are starting to divide themselves into distinct groups, and it's even possible to eyeball where the average proportion is in some sense. And we can go a little further than that. Instead of measuring from 0 and using only the positive numbers on our line, we can shift the line so that the midpoint is now the average value. So we've taken this average line that we plotted and moved it into the middle of our graph. And now it's very easy to tell which dots are above average and which dots are below. and how far these points are from the average. So, not only whether it's above or below average, but where it ranks. So this is the beginning of actually benchmarking all of our different states against the community as a whole. And we can already get a sense of how that might be useful, because there are at least 2 states that are not only quite distant from the average performance line, but also very distant from any of the other groupings of states that we can see along this line. So the one on the right might be doing something particularly well, which could help us identify a best practice that we could spread around to other states in the network. And the one on the left may be in some trouble, and we might want to do more research to figure out what's going on in that state and how we can fix it. And I want to emphasize again that I say might. Be cautious with these visualizations. When they throw out a point of interest, it's a reason for further investigation, not a judgment that needs to be taken at face value about what is happening there. But we can go even further. Right now we're only using one dimension in our visualization, and there's more that we can do to put this number, this impact figure, in context. If we return to our example site X, another way to understand whether our figure for 2016 is large or small is by comparing it with the same measurement from an earlier period. If this number were the number for California and we were only helping 0.02% of the state population, we could still be pleased if we were helping more people in 2016 than we'd helped the year before, right? And even if this were the number for Rhode Island, we'd be concerned if we were suddenly helping fewer people. So, for example, if this number represented a 50,000 person increase over 2015, we would be pretty pleased with the fact that the site was trending in a positive direction, whereas the same figure for Rhode Island could represent a drop depending on what had happened in the year before. And so we can show this in the visualization as well. If we want to compare them to one another, we can express these changes in terms of the degree of difference between the measurement for the period that we're looking at and the same measurement in a previous period. So in addition to the values at the extreme ends of the horizontal, there's now at least one site that appeared to be in the middle of the pack before that we can now tell may also need some further investigation. This site's impact has shrunk since last year, and it's also shrunk considerably more than any of its peers. And what this gets us ultimately is a grid where we can quickly and easily diagnose all of the different states in the network by dividing them into these 4 categories: states that are above average and showing rising performance, states that are below average and showing falling statistics, and then below average and with a rising statistic, and below average with a falling statistic. So this lets us compare states against one another in space, as it were, one state versus another state geographically, and against the same state in a previous time frame. So that is the essence of this first visualization that I showed you, and of the subsequent ones. So we're going to do the same thing with a number of different numbers, with several different numbers, So remember, here we're looking at the number of visitors served, meaning the number of visitors who viewed a resource, downloaded a resource, or clicked a link in a resource that took them to a partner site where some material was hosted, as a proportion of state population. And that gets us at this concept of site impact. But how do we understand site performance? If you recall from earlier, we defined site efficiency as the ratio between the number of visitors a site helped and the number of and the total number of visitors to that site. So we can rework that concept to say that if the impact is expressed in terms of visitors served, there are 2 components that we can look at to understand how we get a visitors served number: the site audience and the site efficiency. So these are the 2 concepts we need to understand in order to look at site performance. And you can sort of get intuitively how these 2 factors might work. There are 2 ways to help 100,000 visitors. You could have a large initial audience and then have a site that is relatively poor at helping them, where only 4 in 10 people actually you know, make it from the home page all the way down into using a LawHelp resource. Or you could have a site with a much smaller initial audience that does a much better job of helping all of the people that come get to a piece of material before they leave. And you'll see that there are some sites that are good at one, and there are some sites that are good at the other, and some sites are good at both. So these are the two concepts that we need to unpack in order to get a sense of what site performance looks like, and we can do that using the same grid. So here, you know, we'll see instead of the number of visitors served, this is just the total number of visitors to a site expressed as a percentage of population. And the distance from the average number is expressed horizontally. So things to the left are below the average for the network, and things to the right are above the average for the network. And vertically, we're seeing the difference between 1 year and the previous year for this figure of the raw number of people who arrive on a site. And that's what this represents. And then you can see a different graph looking at the site performance. So here we're looking at the ratio between not the state population, but the number of people who used site resources, the visitors served, versus the total visitors to that site. So this is where we get the idea that 8 in 10 people, or 4 in 10 people, or 7 in 10 people who come onto the site are being helped. But as far as what the graph is doing, it's doing the same thing that the others have been doing. It's showing you the distance from the average ratio horizontally, and it's showing the difference between the ratio for the measurement period and the ratio for the previous period vertically. And one interesting thing to note here, even without knowing the identity of these individual dots, is that comparing the groupings between these two factors can help us understand what's going on with the platform. There's a pretty tight grouping of sites on the efficiency side that we don't see on the audience side. And that makes a certain amount of sense, since the efficiency of the LawHelp sites is much more within individual programs' control. It's determined entirely by what you do with your visitors once they arrive, whereas the audience may depend on factors that you can't necessarily determine, such as the number of other sites in your state that offer links that might compete with yours in Google searches, etc. And if we track an individual site through all of these different things that we've done, the utility of this work becomes even clearer. For example, here's a site that serves a tiny number of visitors when we use the kinds of raw numbers that we routinely deliver to funders. But when we express these raw totals in terms of population, we can compare them more effectively to other sites and to their past performance. And we see that this site is actually one of the 8 on the platform that not only had above average impact in 2016, but saw its impact grow compared with the year before. So this site looks really insignificant when we look at it in this setting, but it becomes a lot more significant when we put it in context and use this benchmarking method. We can also get a good sense of how the site is achieving this result. It's less efficient than average in 2016, but only slightly. Meanwhile, it was solidly above average in terms of its audience size. These benchmark visualizations make it quick and easy for us to judge this particular site's performance in a much more nuanced way than these raw numbers might on their own, both for the purposes of telling funders what this program is achieving and for determining what kinds of strategies this program might want to focus on if it feels the need to improve its impact still further. And so if you accept the validity of this benchmarking approach, we only need to wade into the messy and overwhelming world of the full Google Analytics LawHelp backend reporting data set when we need to. If the benchmarks suggest that there's something going well or going poorly that we want to investigate further to try and understand why, either to brag about it or to fix it. So going forward, as part of your LawHelp prototype reporting folder, we'll be providing you with written reports displaying and interpreting these benchmarks for each LawHelp site, letting you see on a month-to-month basis how your work translates into site performance and site impact. So, for example, and I've scrubbed it from this visualization, but one of these dots will be labeled and let you know which one is your state. So you won't know the identity of the other dots in the visualization, but one of them or another of them will tell you this is where you are in this picture. And you'll see in your folders right now a performance report showing you 2016 in comparison with 2015, and a performance report showing you February 2017 in comparison with February 2016. And then at the end of this month, you'll see March 2017 in comparison with March 2016, etc. And we'll also begin emailing these to the contact points that we have for each organization as PDFs attachments, so that you can keep a copy for your records. And we're hoping that this will let us and you catch problems more quickly so we can resolve them and disseminate good ideas quickly so that everybody can benefit. These have already been very helpful for me because I don't necessarily have the time to look very deeply into each state's analytics every month to try to catch problems. But with this, I get a bird's eye view of what's going on with the entire platform really quickly, and I can start to reach out to people and let them know when there are things that they may want to try to take a look at. So this is our first attempt to really take control of all this data that we've been collecting and generating for a little while. Internally, these techniques, as I've said, are already helping us with these kinds of tasks. And ideally, as we work together on refining this approach, it'll let us demonstrate the value of all of this more usefully. And so I just want to end with that and open it up for questions. I know we're officially out of time, but if people want to stick around for 5 or 10 minutes, I'd be very happy to take questions on this. In your LawHelp prototype folders, which all of you should have access to in Google Drive, you will find these documents that I'm referring to, where I am, showing you how all of these things shape up. And the last thing that I'll say about that is that in addition to showing you outcomes for individual states, I'm very aware of the fact that these documents also have the potential to reveal issues, and I'm counting on it, with the platform as a whole. So, when I look at things, if I see a pretty even spread, that tells me that it's largely dependent on what people are doing in individual states. And if I see a more tight grouping, that tells me that the platform itself may have a tendency toward a certain thing. So there are certain parts of these visualizations that I've created that are already suggesting to me areas that the platform needs to improve on, and that I'm using in my own work. So that's a lot of information. I hope that I laid it out in a way that you felt was fair and in a way that built in a logical and comprehensible fashion to the more complicated visualizations that I presented and the conclusions that I'm drawing. But I'm very interested to hear what you think. Okay. I don't want to hold people over. Is it possible to unmute everybody, Jillian? Is that a thing we can do just to see if people have thoughts?
Yes.
Thanks. Okay, I'm just going to keep, I can help out here, I think. And if people don't have thoughts, you may find, if you read the reports, you'll see that they include some of the same explanations and preamble that I've tried to provide in this presentation. They'll also include the visualizations and some brief reactions to how the visualizations appear to be shaking out in your specific case. I'll just note that those reactions are somewhat automated, but they give you a quick response and some suggestions about where you might turn next, depending on what you're seeing. I would be very, very happy to talk about this stuff with anyone and everyone who's interested. It is experimental, and so I'm really looking forward to starting a conversation about the best way to refine this work. I think it has a lot of potential. Okay, well, if nobody has questions right now, I understand that this is a lot of new information that I've thrown at you. I'll stick around for a minute or two longer, but I don't have anything else to say myself, so I think we're finished.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Sam.
My pleasure.